I'm Callum Williams, Senior Business Journalist for Insider Sport, and I'm delighted to be joined today with Henry Hodgson, the head of NFL UK and Ireland. How are you doing today, Henry? You okay?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it was great. It's great to for you to take some time with us and speak to us all things NFL. And 2025 is set to be one of the biggest internationally for the NFL this year. So it's going to be great to hear your insight and thoughts on the year that's ahead for the NFL. But you've had a week or two to recover from the Super Bowl. How was the experience in New Orleans? And can you and an unexpected result, right, with the Eagles running out comfortable winners over the Chiefs?
Yeah, it was a great week. I think it's the second time that I've experienced a Super Bowl in New Orleans. I think New Orleans is a fantastic city to host a Super Bowl. It feels like the right size of city. It's obviously a town that has a lot of entertainment, great food, etc. So it's a good spot for the Super Bowl. The stadium's fantastic, and as you say, it turned into a surprising result. Maybe not the greatest Super Bowl game, especially we've been sport the last few years with some really close ones. But it's really cool to have a new Super Bowl champion in the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, just touching a little bit on the Super Bowl. I know it was recorded as the most watched Super Bowl in history, right? Do you have any key statistics or figures coming out from outside the US that kind of attributes that, maybe in the UK or other jurisdictions?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I don't think it was reported as the most watched Super Bowl in the US. I think if you look at what it was reported as is the most watched Super Bowl on Fox
Right, right,
in the
yeah.
US. What we've seen here is again strong results for Super Bowl, good viewership on both Sky and ITV, which are our host broadcasters here in the UK. It fell just slightly behind last year's game between the Chiefs and 49ers in terms of viewership, but still the second most watched Super Bowl in UK history. And I think, in part, there are a couple of factors. I think last year we definitely saw the uplift of the Taylor Swift effect. Her being involved with the Chiefs, with Travis Kelsey, brought in a new audience, which was great this year to see that actually we retained that audience. The sort of the younger audience and the female audience was actually up versus last year. But unfortunately, the game script, just the way that the game went, with it being, as we just said, sort of relatively one-sided, especially in the first half. We see this, and we've seen it over the years. If that happens, getting people to stick, past 1 o'clock in the morning, past half time, is quite difficult to do. So, I think probably if we'd had a closer game, we might have seen a slightly different result when it came to viewership. But I think overall we're very pleased with it, not just for Super Bowl, which, as I say, is sort of slightly out of our hands when it comes to that performance, but really the season long in the UK. We've seen some really strong viewership, especially on Sky Sports, and also, in fact, with NFL Game Pass on DAZN, where we've seen a really strong increase in the number of people using that service as well to watch the NFL.
Yeah, it definitely feels like the Super Bowl and the NFL as a whole is it's really becoming more of an international product, not just for the UK, but a very many other different markets. Just touching on the Super Bowl one last time, I mean, we've seen now like the World Cup and the Champions League, for instance, integrate some of Super Bowl's what should we say, like the halftime show and things around that nature, right? Is there anything from a sponsorship or a marketing aspect that both of those competitions and maybe even other sports can lend its expertise to? I know there's the big thing about the adverts, right? The ads are so universally connected to the Super Bowl. Is there any sponsorship marketing activities that the World Cup or the Champions League could learn from?
I mean, look, I think we can learn equally from the World Cup and the Champions League. It's not something I would say they can learn from us. I think that I hope that we would be more humble than to say this is how it needs to be done. The reality is, the Super Bowl has established its format with entertainment at the center of it, as well as obviously the final and an incredible sporting spectacle that sit together. And I think there are a few sports that have taken from that over the years, but probably established their own way of doing it. I think probably the most recent and the most exciting one that I've seen is very recent this week, but with Formula One's launch event just a couple of days ago, and sort of borrowing from that entertainment piece, and obviously creating a brand new event. And I think that that's a very distinctly Formula One spin on it, but it is, to the same extent that we often employ those tactics to sort of create excitement for a younger audience, for perhaps a more casual fan, for a new person coming into the sport to find their way in. I think that there are. I certainly wouldn't say that they've borrowed from it, but there are elements that you look at and you say, yeah, that seems quite familiar. And it's very cool how they executed it in a slightly different way that was really relevant for the audience that they're developing and growing around the world as well.
Yeah, yeah, especially with so many American owners now in football, particularly, right? There's this kind of almost push for sort of like Americanification of some sports, right? So it's definitely something that is being permeated, I believe, in multiple different sports. So there is also a big divide when it comes to football fans, whether there should be games held overseas in overseas territories. The NFL has not shied away from that. They've been regularly hosting international games all over the world now. I mean, London is one of like the second homes, I guess, right, for some of these international games. But can you talk to us why the NFL is so, I guess, with the fans as well? I mean, could you let us into some insight on why there is such a need for these international games, obviously to grow its footprint, but also with the fans as well? Is there a reluctance from the fans to have these games overseas?
I mean, it's answering the first part of the question. The reason that we play the games overseas, we feel like taking our product around the world is a great way for us to grow the global fan base for the sport, and that's been a stated objective of the NFL from ownership and commissioner down now for a number of years. That started in London in 2007, and obviously has grown around the world in the last few years. And this year we'll play more in more new markets than we ever have done before, which is incredibly exciting. So I think it's an important part, not the only important part, but not the only piece of our global growth strategy. When it comes to teams playing again this year, we'll hit the 40th game in London that's been played here. So I think there's at this point people are used to, or fans are used to, games being played overseas. Certainly early on in that process, I think when it felt a little bit more like there was a question around sort of why is my team going overseas? Perhaps we heard from fans, but I think at this point, now that so many games have been played internationally, and that there's a very fair process when it comes to deciding who goes overseas. So one of the two conferences in the NFL has one more home game than the other one on a biannual basis. And so essentially the one that has 9 home games in a given year, that's where teams will come from that will play internationally. And then the next year it goes over to the other one. And, at most you'll play, I suppose, going forward once every 4 years internationally. So it's not like teams are necessarily being plucked out at random or having to do it more frequently, or the fans are losing a game more frequently than they would be otherwise. So no, I think at this point people are used to it, and people actually embrace the fact that their team is on this sort of global platform. And I think the other piece is, for the most part, these international games land in its own window. So fans back in their home cities can still watch these games live, even if they can't be in the stadium for them.
Yeah, the international strategy is something that's going to grow more this year, right? And I know that the introduction of flag football around communities. I think the Minnesota Vikings have done something in Manchester with regards to flag football within and around schools, increasing the adoption for flag football and also interest in American football, right? Just could you let us into some insight what the introduction of flag football is around communities in international markets and how that's growing adoption for the sport, I guess?
Yeah, so flag football is for people that don't know, is the non-contact version of the sport, and it's something that we as the NFL have really looked to grow internationally as a great way to get young people to participate in the sport. So we have a program called NFL Flag that in the UK and Ireland we run in schools across both markets. We have about 120,000 young people playing flag football as part of their sort of PE curriculum. We have a program that has sort of regional and national finals that help that sport, or help those kids get an opportunity to play at sort of a really high level. And then actually one team or one school from each of those countries goes and represents their country at the Pro Bowl as part of an international flag football program. So flag is a really important part of our business. And then the NFL clubs that are investing as part of our global markets program in different countries around the world have the opportunity to as part, one of the tactics they use to grow the sport in the market, sort of adopt a city or a flag football league around the country that they're responsible for. So I think you mentioned the Vikings. I think they did something in Newcastle. I don't remember them doing something in Manchester as well, but they've certainly done things there. The Jets and Bears have created their own girls flag football league in the London area, which has been incredibly successful. So certainly teams are looking at that and saying, this is a good way for us to sort of put our foot into the market, if you like. And I think they're absolutely right. It makes sense that, you see it when we visit these type of events, the kids that leave there wearing a Vikings jersey or a Bears jersey or a Jets jersey are probably going to go home and be a fan of that team. And they certainly love playing the sport and enjoy participating in flag football and want to continue doing it. So I think we've got something that's really growing very quickly. And as I said earlier, games are an important part of our international strategy for us to grow the sport. But I think flag football, is an equally influential way for us to grow a fan base around the world and to get kids active and healthy and playing sport.
Yeah, it's a really interesting time right now from the two major US sports leagues, yourselves, the NFL and even the NBA as well, because they're kind of on their own international strategy at the moment. I think if you look at some of the best players in their league, they are foreign born players, right? And I was just kind of curious to ask Henry: has the NFL kind of observed any of the strategies that the NBA have done, and is there anything that you could also implement in terms of your own strategy, or vice versa?
I think what you mentioned there, Callum, in terms of the number of international players in the NBA, I think is certainly an area that we look at and are looking to address. And we've had a couple of different ways of doing that through our International Player Pathway program, which is intended to identify elite athletes potentially in other sports or playing American football at an amateur level around the world, give them opportunities to get into the NFL. And we've had some good successes with that. I think probably most notably in the last year with Louis Rees-Zammit. But we also know that, and I suppose also very notably with Jordan Mailata, who was part of the Eagles Super Bowl winning team, and came through that International Player Pathway program. But we also know that I think, getting athletes from other sports and at the ages that, we're probably going to find them as part of the International Player Pathway program, which is sort of 20 and above, is going to be a very hard way for us to achieve the volume that we need. So we launched here in 2019 the NFL Academy, which is a high school age program intended to give younger kids, sort of 16 to 18, the opportunity to learn American football at a really elite level as part of an NFL Academy, alongside their education and sort of a character development program. And what we're seeing now is a lot of those kids getting really good university scholarship offers to play college football in the US, which is, I suppose the second tier of American football in the US, and the very well-established pathway to get your way into the NFL via the NFL draft. And we're really at a point now where some of those players who were part of the beginning of that program are now coming through college football and will have an opportunity to be drafted this year, next year, and beyond. And that's where I think we'll see the upside and the growth for us from a sort of international players playing in the NFL standpoint. So I think I can't speak to other NBA strategies. I wouldn't say that I'm obviously haven't immersed myself in that, but that's certainly one we look at and say, that's a sport that's clearly more accessible around the world in terms of participation. And we have work, honestly, to do to catch up on that front, which flag football will help with. But I think we have now a really good feeder pathway from flag football hopefully into the NFL Academy or through the International Player Pathway Program. And you'll see more and more international faces in the NFL in the coming years.
Yeah, and I guess that also would help drive the adoption, right, in some of the markets. If you see a very successful player from London or even from Germany as well.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Those local heroes help grow the sport. There's no doubt about that. And Jordan Mailata is a good example for Australia. We've had F.A. Obada, who's played for 10 years in the NFL from the UK, and certainly he's much more familiar to fans here. So I think the more you can tell the stories of these guys and the fact that they came from these markets, and hopefully that they came via a pathway that we've established, whether it's Flag or NFL Academy or the International Player Pathway Program, I think that you're absolutely right. That leads to adoption of the sport more broadly.
yeah, definitely, massively agree with you there, Henry. So we're touching on some of the new markets or the market strategies when it comes to entering these markets, hosting regular season games. I was just kind of wondering what kind of goes into the strategy of entering a new market. I know there's two new markets the NFL will look to go into this year with regular season games in Dublin and Madrid. I was just wondering what would be some of the key performance indicators, I should say, in when it comes to entering those markets.
Yeah. So I mean, I think first and foremost, we've I think the NFL sees the opportunity to become a truly global sports league. Looks at the likes of the Premier League, the NBA, Formula One, etc. And part of that is that they, to some extent or other, play all over the world. And I think probably Formula One's the best example of that when you look at the number of races that obviously are in markets across the globe. And so we've looked and really tried to identify what are markets that the NFL has an opportunity to grow in, not just to play games in, but actually to build a sustainable fan base, to tell to find the right media partners, to build participation, to tell stories in, and to kind of show off the sport in, and so through that process that's been undergone for the last couple of years. Several markets have been identified. Then when it comes to playing games, I suppose, as an add-on to that, you then look at the viability of stadiums, etc., in that market, to identify like whether we can actually, certainly we want to grow in more markets, but whether we can actually play games in those markets. In this year, you're absolutely right that Spain and Ireland are two of the new markets that will come on board. And so, we clearly have some great partnerships in those markets. For Spain, with the Bernabeu, we've got a partnership with Real Madrid to play a game there. We have a team in the Miami Dolphins who are very interested in growing their fan base in Spain, and in fact, have identified sort of Spanish-speaking markets more broadly as their opportunity, especially given the cultural diversity in Miami and the number of Spanish-speaking people who live there. So that's been a focus for them. So that was an opportunity for us to play at the Bernabeu, and for the Miami Dolphins to be part of that as part of a broader strategy to grow the fan base in Spain. And I suppose, it's not a dissimilar story in Ireland. The Pittsburgh Steelers are part of our global markets program, and they had invested with a first team to invest in that market. And that was born out of the Rooney family, who own the ownership of the Steelers, who are from Ireland themselves, and emigrated to Pittsburgh and ended up starting the Pittsburgh Steelers franchise. So I think for them, there was a very singular focus on an opportunity to continue to grow their fan base in Ireland, and as part of that, to play a game there. And again, we had done a feasibility study into stadiums, and selected Croke Park as the venue for it. So, this is all part of that global growth strategy that I mentioned. It, again, is a portion of it. We want to make sure that we're not just seen as a traveling circus. We want to come and deliver an incredible sports event, a sort of mini Super Bowl, if you like, in those markets when we play there. But at the same time, we want to see this as a longer term strategy that includes games, but isn't limited just to games. It's also about growth of flag football. It's also about finding the right partners that can help us grow from a sort of media standpoint, etc. And while the games are probably the most visible piece of that, we expect to be doing a lot of things in those markets that go above and beyond the games themselves.
Yeah, I think you described it brilliantly well there, Henry. I know there's been a lot of excitement for that Dublin game. I've heard around the office. So yeah, it's
Good.
going to
Yeah,
be
yeah. No, we're very excited about that one for sure.
yeah. As the NFL head of Ireland as well, I'm sure that's probably going to be your most anticipated international game this season, right?
I mean, it will be among them. You know, it's certainly a first. I've been very lucky. I was here in London for the first game in London back in 2007 as part of the NFL UK team. So got a chance to see that. And I've had an opportunity to see the first games sort of back in Mexico, the first game in Germany. So I think those first games are really special. And I'll have an opportunity to obviously be at that one in Dublin and as well as in Madrid. But I also, you know, inevitably the London games are very special as well. I think they're kind of, you know, the blueprint for international growth was born out of London. As I mentioned earlier, this year will mark the 40th game in London. We started in 2007, so we're not far off our 20th anniversary as well. And you know, it's important for us, especially with, you know, such a fantastic stadium as Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, which I still believe is, you know, a top 5 NFL stadium, no matter where it is in the world. That we deliver great games here as well. So certainly looking forward to the one in Dublin, but also very excited about London, about Madrid, actually also about Berlin as well. That's a stadium. I think the Olympic Stadium in Berlin is an incredible venue, and I think having been around NFL Europe when there were games for the Berlin Thunder at the Olympic Stadium, I'll be excited to see an NFL game there as well.
Yeah, funnily enough, Henry, that was coming towards my final question. I'm sure you've heard this question plenty of times. When is there going to be an NFL franchise in London or in Europe? And like you mentioned, there was NFL Europe back in the late '90s and early 2000s. I guess that's going to be my final question. Really, is like, when is the next step in this international expansion going to be? I should maybe even continental divisions, continental leagues, I should say, and then making it accessible to everyone around the world.
Yeah, I think for now, as I said, the NFL is really focused on sort of how do we grow the number of markets that we're present in. And again, that presence is games, but it's also just, you know, being present year round and creating fandom. Um, I think an outcome of that could in the future be international based franchises. The commissioners talked about an internationally based or European based division. I think it would be, you know, there are a number of logistic hurdles that you have to overcome there, you know, related to travel and then sort of taxation of players and all kinds of things that you know is going to be sort of a deeply involved process to get through. But for now, I think, you know, really our focus is really on growing the number of markets that we're present in and that we play games in, and from there we'll see where it takes us.